Welcome everyone to our first event of 2011, which is Meet the Analysts, and this is our second event that we've done like this. We did one last year, which was very, very popular, and no doubt tonight it's the same result. We have had a lot of people register, and it's great to see a turnout considering the weather. I'd like to say that over the last 2 years, we've really grown the chapter to become the largest mobile networking group in the Canadian market. And I think the credit is due to everyone who comes out and supports the event. So we have great audience turnouts all the time. But we'd also like to thank, everyone clap for themselves. Also like to thank Mars and the team that they've put together to support us for this, including the AV and filming and sound and everyone else, and of course Janet and Alan and Peter and Andrea and Don. But also key part of this success is the sponsors that we have, and a lot of local companies and groups have stepped up to the table over the last 6 months, and we really appreciate that because it's really allowed us to grow the chapter and really scale it with a lot of great events and great ideas to really keep the momentum going. So first of all, I'd like to thank our sponsors, Miller Thomson, and I believe Karen and Bob are here from Miller Thomson somewhere. So are they? There's Bob at the back. So he's a specialist in setting up companies and structuring organizations, and Miller Thomson also does a lot of work with intellectual property. So there'll be a group that you need to talk with if you have questions or legal opinions that are needed. Also Nokia, Chad Saliban team. I'm not sure if Chad is here tonight, but he spoke at the November event, and they're a great supporter. Rogers Wireless, which came on board, and Larry Baziou and Nicole Mark and Will Jew were here, or are here. I'm not sure if everyone left their card out there for the draw that we're going to do, but they're a great partner, and if you want to know more about the Rogers Catalyst program, you can certainly talk with them outside. TELUS has also come on board as a partner, and we appreciate Andrew Scott Reed and Ann and them shepherding the commitment from TELUS to help us out here at the chapter. Wind Mobile, so we had Tony speak with Alec in our event for December, and it's interesting over the last week just what's happened in the market, and I'm sure Jeff and the analyst team will certainly talk about that to give a perspective or some opinions on regulatory issues that'll be coming up over the next 45 days. BDC, I know some people from BDC here, so thank you for your support. Redknee, Lucas and team, and Redknee has become an emerging player in mobile operator billing infrastructure, so they've been very successful over the last 10 years, and Lucas spoke at one of our events in April 2009, I believe, so he's a real good, dynamic speaker. CWTA, MarketWire, and also Dudane Multimedia, which helps us with our website. In the last month, we've also brought on board Public Mobile. So after the event that we had in December, Alec really liked what we were doing. He had a great time in this fireside chat with Tony and Jeff Mucci, our moderator for tonight, and he thought that this is a really good, important organization to support, so he's come on board to throw a support behind our chapter, which is fantastic, so we really appreciate that. I'd like to also give a warm welcome to Jonathan Levy from the Israeli Economic Mission. So Jonathan's here. Okay, there he is right there. And if anyone wants to talk to Jonathan about collaborations with Israeli companies or find out more about what he's doing, he'll be here tonight, of course, and if you're attending Mobile World Congress in Barcelona, you can certainly arrange to set up a time with him there. Also, in the last couple weeks, there's been a new program set up at Ryerson, which is a mobile educational program, and that's been set up by Shyam, and Shyam's here somewhere. There he is right there. So this is a new program that Cheyenne and team set up with Ryerson. It's a certified program around all aspects of the mobile industry, and if you want to find out more about that, certainly just network with Cheyenne after. How shall we start? We have a fantastic event with our analysts that are back from last year. So we have Krista Napier from IDC Canada. We have Michael Erlocker from GMP. Securities, and we have our favorite Brazilian analyst, Ronald Gruya from Frost & Sullivan, and Ronnie always has interesting stories. And moderating the event, we have Jeff Mucci from RCR Wireless. Jeff did the event last year, and he also did the event for December with Tony and Alec. And he always does a great job bringing out the best of the speakers and hitting on the key topics. So I'd like to bring Jeff up to the podium, and he'll take it from here. So thank you very much.
Test. We're live. Jim, thanks again for the kind introduction, and thanks for letting me come to Toronto. Folks say, Jeff, why do you come up here so much? I'm from Austin, Texas. We don't get a lot of snow. So I come up once or twice a year and get to enjoy the weather you have here. But tonight's format is going to be a little bit different than last year. Each of the three analysts are going to speak on a different topic. Krista's going to focus on tablets and digital media. Michael's going to focus on apps and where we're going with the apps pricing and OS. And then finally, Ronald's going to talk about the future of 4G in Canada. And so the format, we're going to have each of them talk about the big ideas and the big trends in each of those categories. We'll have a discussion here and some Q&A, and then we'll open it up to the audience for a few questions after each session. So there are going to be three individual conversations, and we'll take a couple questions after each one. And our goal is to simply keep the audience engaged so you don't fall asleep after the first hour. So unless somebody has some questions, we're going to get started with Krista, who's a senior analyst with IDC and is focusing in probably one of the most exciting areas, digital media. And you've got a few slides, and then we'll ask you a few questions.
Yeah, that's right. So just before we get started, if I can do a quick survey of the room, how many people here own an iPad or a Samsung Galaxy Tab? So that's actually pretty good. That's probably at least 30% of the room there. So that's impressive considering that media tablets were only introduced into the market as a separate product category in the second quarter of last year. What's even more impressive is the number of tablets that we can expect to see shipped in Canada in 2011. We're expecting to see triple-digit growth between 2010 and 2011 in terms of shipments here in Canada. So what's causing all of that growth? Well, what's causing the growth is this tsunami, a media tablet tsunami, that is. So there's three things that I'm going to highlight tonight about this market as this wave of media tablets hits in Canada in 2011. I'm going to talk a little bit about how we're going to see more products from probably around 12 different vendors, 12 different products hitting the market. We'll see more of a variety of price points as well on the market, and we'll see a more varied group of users as well, not just consumers. So if we plug into the first trend here, I would expect to see about probably a dozen different media tablets in the market by the end of the year in Canada. So this slide here is used to show and illustrate what that market's going to look like. Each of those circles represents a different vendor in the market with a media tablet in Canada. The size of the circle represents the size of the screen that we can expect to see. The big circles are probably around 10-inch screens. The smaller circles are closer to 7-inch screens. The green circles represent devices that are operating off of Android. Blue represents QNX, red represents iOS, and what's missing from this chart is WebOS as well. I would expect to see at least one player in the market by the end of the year. So, and then price point, that middle price point there is $500, and then more expensive, less expensive. Left-hand side of the screen is open operating system, right-hand side is closed operating system. So the takeaway from this slide is we're going to see a whole bunch of products, most of them operating off of Android-based systems, most of them hovering around that $500 mark, and so it's going to be very important for vendors coming into the market to have really clear messaging, because the average end consumer is going to be probably fairly confused in the market. Also from a developer point of view, last year if you were developing for a media tablet, it was pretty simple. You developed for iOS. That was really the only product in the market until the end of the year when Samsung came out. Moving into this year, we are going to see Android taking away share from iOS. It is going to be an important platform because there will be so many different devices out there operating off of it. As we see an increasing number of competitors and products in the market, we see competition go up, and we will see prices slowly starting to come down. This is based off of a survey that we did at the end of last year. We asked Canadian businesses what they would optimally want to pay for a media tablet in Canada. And we found that that optimal range was somewhere between $390 and $480 on average. Anything more than that, and it started to be prohibitive, price started to be a prohibitive factor in buying more, and anything less than $390 started to be perceived as cheap. And so while the average sales price of a device last year was still a starting price of at least around $500 to $600, and now we're seeing Zoom coming out with potentially a price point around $800, we did see some vendors come into the market at the end of last year, quietly, that had significantly lower sales prices. So we saw Kobe come in with a device at $159. We saw Velocity Micro and Stream TV Networks and ViewSonic all coming in with devices under $500 as well. And so those lower end devices are going to bring down that average sales price, and we're going to see that happening over the next 4 years. In terms of the user base, the size of the Canadian market, we'll see about 1.5 million devices in the Canadian market by the end of the year. So that includes all devices that were shipped in 2010 and the ones that are being used in 2011. So there'll be a total number of devices in Canada. The majority of those, 90% plus, are expected to be consumers as of now. But we're going to see an increasing number of businesses throughout the rest of 2011 starting to adopt these. And so some of the vertical industries where we expect to see a lot of adoption is in medical and with doctors and nurses. The Ottawa Hospital is already using these with their nurses for bedside patient care and as a way to ensure accuracy of information that's taken from the patient to the nurse and then into the computer system. We're also expecting to see a rollout, significant rollout with retail and with restaurants in particular. And we've already seen 11 restaurant here in Toronto down at the ACC that has about 30 of these as an e-sommelier. And if you can imagine, you don't have to sell very many bottles of wine before you realize your money back in terms of a return on these. And then we also expect to see more of them being used in the boardroom with executives. They're a fabulous tool for document review and approval and presentations. And so we'll see more of them being rolled out with businesses as well. So 2010 was the year that we were introduced to media tablets. 2011 will be the year of more. More products, more vendors, more features, more apps, and more users. This will be the year of media tablet mania, and it's only just begun. Thanks very much.
Well done. Okay, as I said, we've got a slightly different format. We're going to have a little bit of a discussion here in Q&A. If you want to ask Krista a question, please go ahead and take a spot at the mic, and we'll open up for audience questions after each one of the speakers. So, Krista, the first question I have is, Apple has first mover advantage. How are the others going to compete and catch up?
Yeah. Apple naturally had a first mover advantage because they were the only competitor in the market for most of last year. But not all customer fits the perfect Apple profile. And so there will be room for competitors. For example, RIM is coming to market with their playbook. RIM has a fabulous reputation here in Canada and abroad for security. You already have a number of businesses, they're the leading smartphone provider here in Canada from an iOS perspective. So they have that install base already, and I think you'll see a lot of businesses that are favored to those devices. And you'll see a number of the other competitors positioning themselves uniquely as well with consumers, and you could even see some specializing in certain vertical industries as well. I think the Ritz-Carlton hotel that's opening up in Wellington is a good example of how different devices could be used. I know that they're looking to use the iPad in their restaurant as an e-sommelier when you're ordering a drink or a glass of wine. I know that they're also looking to expand their use of media tablets beyond that, so that if you're checking into the hotel, you can do that in sort of a kiosk fashion on your own, and you don't have to necessarily speak with a representative there. But I know that they are concerned about security from that perspective, because now you're dealing with credit card information and personal visitor information. So I think that they could potentially be leaning towards something that's seen as more secure, maybe something like a playbook for that. So again, different needs of different users, and there'll be a media tablet for all of them.
Okay. Ron, Michael, either one of you want to comment on Apple's big lead and what it's going to take for others to catch up?
Well, I would observe, I watched the replay of the seminar we did a year ago, and I think if we could say we were guilty, of underappreciating how strong a product the iPad is. And a year later, it's done really well, and it's started to penetrate the corporate market, especially in America. So first off is to acknowledge, I would say Apple's presence in the market is very, very strong. I'm a RIM analyst. I'm not so convinced of the success of the playbook on kind of on technical specs. It kind of meets the check marks, and the early previews show, it's a powerful machine and all. But it's yet to be proven how well RIM will market it or whether they position it properly. Because RIM is kind of trying to play this, awkward position of it's an enterprise working professional tool, but the thing's called a playbook, and they show games and movies on it. And to me, I don't think RIM has fully figured out how to cater to those two markets with the same product. So technically, it looks good. I'll wait to see how they execute on it. But you can't underestimate the strength Apple has. Norm?
I agree with my two colleagues here. I think what will be interesting to see in this market, in my view, you saw those green dots that you had there with Android, is whether or not we're going to see a replay of what happened on the handset market side, on the playbook side. Because yes, while Android is quote unquote open, there's already been a lot of fragmentation that has happened. So if I'm a developer, I'm putting my old Nortel developer hat on, and I have to code something for one Android handset, and then I have to quickly recompile that and sort of think of a different Android device. If I'm going to have the same issue, plus more because it's bigger real estate and there's more to play with on a playbook factor. So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. I think it's going to be interesting also to see the RIM execution with the playbook and whether or not the developer models how they're going to take hold. But all in all, I think it's going to be good. It's going to be competitive, and almost as an afterthought, we don't see so much. The netbooks are kind of people still talk about them, but not as much. And in fact, I remember going to this Deloitte a year ago, and they were saying netbooks, and then this year they were saying, oh, see, tablets. Yeah. so who knows? There could be some new things. I think also on the smartphone side, where this will probably be maybe also the year of the cheaper smartphone kind of coming on.
No doubt. Again, we'd like to take questions from the audience if you have one. While this gentleman's getting queued up, I'm going to ask well, go ahead. If you're ready, just state your name and the question.
Great. It's Glenn McKnight. I'm from Nisus. Great presentation. A couple of questions. There's two ends of the market that you didn't touch on. One is the one laptop per child has come up with a tablet as well. It's all obviously for the I guess the digital divide people. And the other sector is manufacturing. You skipped over that. You dealt with health, retail, and the boardroom, and I'm just curious for the IDC study if you've seen any action on the manufacturing floor.
Yeah, so we've seen activity in a number of other verticals other than just those three. I just highlighted those, so I'm not here all night. But what's actually, I should have clarified, is that from a media tablet point of view, we have a very strict definition about what we're counting and what we define as a media tablet. So at IDC, we define that as anything over 5 inches and under 14 inches in terms of a screen size. And that helps to differentiate away from a smartphone. We also differentiate based on the operating system. Media tablets are inherently designed to be lightweight. So it's not supposed to replace your desktop because it's not intended to be doing heavy hardcore computing. And so we actually don't count devices right now, at least, we don't count devices that are running Windows because we would consider that a full operating system and not a lightweight one. So some of those devices you talked about, I think may have fallen outside of that definition possibly. But you're right, there are other verticals that are very well suited to this manufacturing. We've seen them being used actually in energy as well. with field workers that are going door to door and collecting information from households, and they've been great for that because they are good for data entry and being able to connect to the network right away. So yeah, lots of different applications in different vertical markets. These ones just happen to be 3 where we saw some initial uptake at the end of last year, actually partway through last year, which was impressive considering that, again, it was a brand new product and a new product category, and to see businesses adopting them so quickly was pretty remarkable.
Got time for one more quick question? Sure.
My name is Philip Bender. What does this mean for the Kindle and the dedicated book readers?
Yeah, that's a great question. So e-readers, we've seen some great market growth with them as well in the double digits. And I think in some respects it's somewhat of a different market. You see hardcore book readers that are really interested in reading books and not necessarily interested in some of the other features and functionality. The e-readers are also approaching a $100 price point, so they're very easily accessible, great for gifting, whereas media tablets are still quite expensive. Personally, I bought a media tablet, and after I had it for about 3 days, I went out and bought an e-reader because I didn't like the glare and I get migraines and it really bothered me. So I think the way that a media tablet is designed right now, it could create some cannibalization for ebooks, but for the most part, I think the ebook still does a good job at reading books. And they might run into some problems as new technology comes out with media tablets that makes it easier or less glary or easier to read outside in the sun and that kind of thing. But for now, we're not seeing a ton of cannibalization in that market.
Okay, thank you. Those are great questions. We're going to move on to the next one. If you have other questions, we're going to have another Q&A session at the very end. Before I move on to Michael, I want to take a quick survey, which I take every time I moderate here. How many folks here are with carriers? If I get a show of hands. So maybe a dozen to 15, 20 folks. How many people here work with OEMs, equipment companies? And how about app developers? Good. Software companies? Good, good. That's kind of both, app developer, software. You work out of a garage or you have an office? I think that's a differentiator. Yeah. Michael is a securities analyst, joined us last year. Thank you again for being here tonight. You're going to talk about one of the latest crazes, apps pricing,
Sure.
And where we're going with the application developers.
So thank you, Jeff. So just to remind you, like I'm a stock guy. I analyze a bunch of different tech stocks. Some are software, some are hardware, and some are related to telecom. And one of the things that struck me over the years in looking at various aspects of the wireless industry, whether it started with telecom equipment, I used to follow the big equipment companies, or right through to carrier services, and now with apps, is I have this kind of harsh view of the industry. I think the industry is commoditized, and you can see there, you see the price of apps. On iPhone last year fell 19%. In the BlackBerry world, they fell 24%, and clearly Nokia had some kind of pricing problem with a much harsher decline in app prices. And I think that it kind of surprised me when I saw this data, because I don't think anyone would be surprised if we thought about long distance pricing, right? Like we're all aware of that. So just to give you some figures here, international toll used to be the big gravy train of the telcos, right? And so I looked up the stats on the FCC. In 1980, Jeff, you'll remember that, dialing international toll cost on average, according to the FCC, $1.34 a minute. That's a hell of a rate, right? And then by year 2000, it was 49 cents a minute. By 2005, it was 11 cents. It's stabilized. The latest figures they have for 2008 is 10 cents a minute. According to the FCC, but of course you'd be seriously misled if you paid attention to the FCC rate, because the real issue is there are all sorts of people who've essentially bypassed the entire dialing market, and they're using either prepaid cards to India for 2 cents a minute, or they're Skyping, or probably the biggest factor of all is people just aren't phoning anymore, right? A lot of the kids don't phone people, and especially they don't feel a need to phone overseas. So you see this sort of commoditization of that market. We also wouldn't be surprised, if you think about hardware, telecom equipment hardware, we used to see 30% price declines, whenever the Chinese got active each year, right, which was pretty tough. But the other one that kind of surprised me, because I think the whole industry goes this way, is, you know, I looked up Indian cellular ARPU, right? Because the Telecom Regulatory Authority of India has these stats just like the FCC. And again, 34% decline in ARPU last year in India. You know, like, that's a heck of a crush on price, right? And we haven't quite seen that in Canada in terms of ARPU. Like I think the latest rates were down 1%. You know, it's come off just a little bit from 2008. But there's nothing about the wireless industry to me that says you can have a special part of the market that's protected from these trends. And you know, again, to our perhaps mistake a year ago, I don't think anyone got up here and said, yeah, this great new gravy train of apps is going to get crushed on price. So then I thought about, well, how did we get here, right? And typically what you see when there's this kind of price erosion is the barriers to entry are really low, right? And so what does it take to have an app company? You know, it takes one guy, right? Maybe a half a guy or two guys, but you can set up an app company pretty easily without much effort. And then the second part that's important to recognize is the distribution channel is essentially automated, and as long as you're living within the spec of the guy who controls the store, in the case of iTunes or Android, there's basically no criteria. You can automatically upload your app with no effort whatsoever, right? And it's technically available to all users. It's not like you have to go schlock this down on Fifth Avenue in New York to go from store to store to get people to take your good. It's available readily, and that's a great thing for an opportunity, but it also means everybody else can do it as well. And then I think what really happens to cause this sort of price erosion is one guy steps in and breaks price. And typically what happens is that guy has a different business model than everybody else, or a different goal or a different agenda, and hence he destroys the market because he's trying to achieve something. And so what we saw is, like in the equipment business, it was Huawei, primarily the Chinese equipment maker, that wanted to establish itself in Western or North American carriers, and they killed price. In the case of apps, just before Christmas, Electronic Arts, you know, they're a console game maker. They gutted their prices because they wanted to show that they were a player in this new media, and so everything went for 99 cents, right? And like it caught people by surprise because they thought they were safe. In the case of long distance, you get these prepaid card guys who are essentially reselling minutes. You know, they have a different kind of business process and a different set of overheads than the carriers, and you know, they can kill price and still make money. And then the last thing to observe, and this is kind of harsh or cruel, ultimately when the pricing gets commoditized, I think consumers, the guys who actually buy these things, step back and they look and they say, well, you know, really, is there that much value add or that much differentiation between these products? One of them sells for X and one of them sells for 3X, and you know, frankly, they're hard to tell the difference. And so, you know, that's the kind of the hard reality, I guess, that I think is prevalent in the industry. Then I just wanted to highlight kind of a thing to be aware of. This is a bit of a management issue. Often when there's a harsh price downturn, I think there's a tendency towards denial, and I don't mean the river in Egypt, that people will say, well, you know, it was a tough price war, but we think it's gonna get better next year, or it won't be as harsh. And you know, that's a message that senior management and the people in the companies want to believe, right? So, you know, here's the trend on Indian cellular ARPU, you know, since 07, and you know, like I guess 280 rupees a month seemed like a pretty fair price in 07, but it's a lot lower now. And you can, you know, it's not the case that always the price declines accelerate, but it's something you should be aware of, is that often when there's a fundamental erosion of price, it's because the business has changed fundamentally and it can't recover. So kind of here's a joke. I remember in, I think it was 2000, I was talking to one of the senior executives at Bell Canada, and you know, at the time I think long distance rates were 12 or 14 cents a minute, and the guy was saying, well, you know, we think it's going to stabilize around 10 cents and you know, won't go much lower. And at the time, I was a stock analyst, and I thought, man, I hope this guy is lying to me. Like, I hope he doesn't really believe that, because if he does, he's cooked, right? And so I checked the average price of long distance tonight before I came here. It's not disclosed the same way as it used to be, but the guys in our shop said, 7 to 9 cents is their best estimate. So to some extent, the Bell Canada executive was correct that it's been stable, but he's technically correct, but he's wrong in the bigger picture because so many people have migrated off the network to do other things like Skype calls or prepaid calls that the collapse of the volume is really killing them as well. So I would just say, you want to be careful that you have to brace yourself for these trends over time. And with that, I'll turn it over to questions.
Good. So I've got a couple questions. If somebody has a question in the audience, please step up to the mic and we'll be right with you. Really two areas of questions. One is on the OS side, the second one's going to be on the carrier side. So what are your thoughts on the OS wars in terms of RIM, Microsoft, and Nokia?
Sure. So if you can pull my slides up again, I have a third one here. I'm breaking the rules. Thank you. So, I think we would all recognize in the OS wars or handsets, clearly iPhone really changed the industry in the past 3 years, right? It's, how many people here have iPhones? You don't want to raise your hand. All right, how many people here had a BlackBerry and dumped it for an iPhone? Right. I mean, and keep in mind, we're in the center of BlackBerry headquarters, more or less. This is a very strong market for RIM, but the iPhone, I think, has really changed the industry. Now this chart shows we normalized our estimate on Android shipments in the darker bar from a time zero launch date. And what you can see, again, we compared it to iPhone, and what you see is the Android shipments are going at a far faster and steeper rate of growth than what iPhone saw. And so I would draw the natural conclusion, if you thought iPhone changed the industry, check again, because it's about to change, I think, in a much more profound way with Android, because you've got far more manufacturers supporting it. It's free to the manufacturers, and it's technically open, although you have these problems with variants. So I would just say, like, the iPhone may prove to be a kind of a US phenomenon, whereas Android has the potential to go into, not everybody in China can pay $600 for a smartphone, right? But they can pay $50 to $100 for a cheap clone phone with Android on it.
So other than price, what do you think is really driving this kind of adoption on Android? Well,
I mean, it's a compelling OS. I mean, I think it's physically attractive. It's kind of fun. I had, just from my own experience as a user, I had this. You can witness the power of the open source software approach. In that, like, if I used to be a newspaper guy, so I like to read newspapers. So I checked the newspaper app, and he had a bunch of newspapers, but I was kind of looking for I think the Ottawa Citizen or the Toronto Star or something. Wasn't there. Well, you just wait a couple of weeks, and the guy revs his app, and next thing you know, it's there, right? And you have this kind of speed of development, both of the app developers and the software itself, that are revving the product at a really rapid rate. That's one thing. And it's open, so there's downside there in terms of security. Like any hacker can launch any app and put it up on the system and invade your privacy and steal your banking information and create viruses. And Google's view is more or less buyer beware, right? I mean, that's a very different approach than what Apple has.
Okay. Any questions from the audience? Okay. Well, maybe let's.
Oh, there's one.
There we go. Thank you.
I'm Chris Sullivan, actually, from IDC, Canada. Great presentation, Chris. When you're talking about the price going down of the apps, so are the app developers who are winning and doing well, are they like riding the volume increase, or are some of them managing to preserve their higher prices and margins?
Yeah, keep in mind most app developers are private companies, and it's hard to get information on them, right? And I don't actually study them, but I'll observe what I can. it's a highly polarized market, right? So there's a couple of star apps, you know, like Angry Birds, that Angry Birds. Who's got Angry Birds, right? Like liars. That everybody likes to download, right? And I'm not sure what made Angry Birds a success, but once it starts going, you know, people want to install it and they'll pay for it. But I think and then there's a whole bunch of apps that get installed for like 2 days and then get deleted and never get used again. So I think most app makers aren't making much money at all, and you know, are going to give up or, you know, just sell their game to somebody else and move on. But I think the truth is, I've seen some success with apps where there's a high degree of customization that seems to get people hooked. You know, where you're, you know, there's one from a Toronto company called XMG. I think it's called Drag Racer, where you drive a car, but it's not really about the car. It's about decorating your car, right, and painting it and coloring it and who knows what. And people seem to really like that customization approach. So I think ultimately it comes down to being creative, identifying a new problem, and a degree of customization is valuable.
Good evening. Thanks for coming here. We develop the opposite of apps. We don't use apps or plugins, and we get basically the multimedia-rich content on a mobile phone, ubiquitous to any phone. We also been able to play Flash on a mobile phone. Now, because we don't do apps, we're like alternative, a bit disruptive. Where do you think that we stand as far as apps or no apps?
I'm not sure I really get you.
Well, we don't use any apps, and we get the same result as you would on a mobile phone, and we can add, you know, multimedia,
So you sell this to end users, or you sell this to somebody else who puts it into their program?
Well, we sell it to people who want to deliver content on a mobile phone, and have to develop a different app for every different device. And we've been able to find a way that we take the file, convert it, so it plays onto any device ubiquitously, including the iPhone that plays the Flash video. So I wanted to find out, you know, where we compare to apps. What do you think the future is for companies that, you know, do an alternative development? Thank you.
Well, okay, I'll try my best. You know, I'm not really hung up on apps or non-apps, but I say if you're solving a problem for a customer, and if the guy's paying you, and if you have an ability to preserve that value by adding increased functionality or helping your content guys reach a greater audience or generate revenue, then you're in a good position. And if instead you're trying to do a better job of Flash, or I don't know, trying to do a better job of streaming than what someone else has, then it's kind of a tougher thing. But if you can solve a unique problem, then it's a good situation.
I had a question about that. Is it through transcoding that you do this, or how do you?
Well, we have a converter. We call her Olivier, and you can put any files into it, and it converts it to works on a mobile device. Yeah, it works through a browser, but we can also use a gateway app. It's just a gateway that takes it, you know, that works like an app too.
Okay, so that's part of your secret sauce, right? Like,
yeah, that's part of our proprietary, yes, sir.
Okay, and you'd work with any platform. Okay, like whether it be some of the more exotic ones like Sony Ericsson, or?
It works on any device. We've tested it on all the different mobile devices, even on the iPad.
Interesting.
And we end up to be able to
I think
get it
from a time standpoint, we want to keep moving. I think what I'll do is come back to the question of OS and actually devices in terms of the question of fragmentation and what that really means to the carriers. How do they keep up with this? Because with the new tablets, a developer has to make a decision. What are we going to develop on? So you got real fragmentation there. The carriers have the same issue. How do they set up their telco stores? How they embrace the developer community? is there going to be another layer that evolves that allows folks to not have to develop for a bunch of different platforms? So I want to come back and revisit fragmentation, but I do, if you get time for one quick question here, and then we'll keep moving.
Yes, my question is, well, the stats that were displayed here are on consumer apps where the end user pays for the apps or is compensated via ad revenue. What about B2C and B2E apps? Do you see businesses investing significantly in that space?
Oh yeah, I mean in business and in enterprise apps, or let's just call it enterprise technology, if you're delivering a real important value to the customer, so for example, I work for a brokerage, a CRM system for a brokerage is highly valuable, right? If it works, and adding a mobile functionality to CRM for a brokerage, that's highly valuable. So you can protect against that trend. Arguably, if you have a good kind of monthly service fee, maybe you don't even experience this sort of harsh decline because you get the special position of being embedded into the enterprise. Yeah, but I just think, I wanted to show the initial slide there to make a provocative statement that I think in general in the software industry, we all look at those hardware jokers and go, well, of course you guys get commoditized because you're just dumb hardware guys and you don't understand value add like us brilliant software people do. And I'm trying to make the point that nobody's ultimately protected long-term against some pretty harsh pricing trends, right? So you have to be attuned to when the industry changes and when there's a new guy out there to eat your lunch by changing the market.
So before we move away from the OS wars, I didn't give Ron or Krista a chance to really talk about what you think is going to play out in terms of these app wars.
Yeah, I mean, I think carriers are sitting on a lot of really valuable information that would be valuable for the developer community. And they know who's using the apps when and where and how long they're using them for. So we've already seen some carriers in other countries launching their own mobile app stores and trying to attract the developer community in that sense. I think Telecom Italia has their own store now, Telefonica. We've heard that Verizon is looking at launching their own Android-based store. So again, Ron mentioned, one of the challenges with Android, with the fragmentation, and you kind of look out for yourself on Android because there isn't a lot of qualification of what gets put on there. And so we've seen some carriers helping customers with some of that qualification, and Verizon looking to do that so that when you go to the Verizon site, you just get the qualified Android-based app. So there's definitely an opportunity for them to befriend the developer community and add a lot of value that the developers maybe can't get elsewhere.
Ron?
Well, this is all very interesting, and please bear with me because my voice has kind of been up and down the whole day today. It's been spending the day talking to clients, but basically, I think that yes, there will be definitely commoditization for some apps, most of the apps, but I think there's definitely going to be. I think where you're going to find value is the verticalized apps. Like for instance, Telefonica has done a great job with e-health apps, and I think really. I don't know if I could if I could rewind back a year ago and talk about my presentation when I was talking about the two-sided business models and what it was going to take for us to see more of those develop in the industry. I think that the success story for the apps is twofold, right? Yeah, you have the like you look at the tail end of apps, right? Like where you have the app stores that will cater to a very narrow percentage of the subscriber base, right? You're going to have the mainstream apps. You're going to have some apps kind of in the middle, and so at the end of the day, I think the two-sided business models where you start focusing on apps that are going to go not only downstream to the customers but also upstream to content developers, to government, to perhaps new customers, and this is where Entity Docomo iMode was so successful. It was because they really decided to do. It was a very bold step of opening up their network to third-party app developers. You know, they would have a qualification test that they would need to pass to make sure it wouldn't crash the network, but those were the early days. But, you know, nevertheless, they took precaution, and then they were doing simple billing on behalf, you know, for that app developer and taking a small percentage. So that's a very interesting two-sided, two-sided business model. Unfortunately, operators here on our end of the pond, they haven't yet. The only two-sided play really that has worked reasonably well has been toll-free numbers, right? And so what ideally I would like to see develop is a little bit more of that. And we're beginning to see things open up a bit, but I still think, you know, operators are a little bit reluctant to quote unquote fully open up their networks a little bit more. It's gradual, and it's certainly encouraging to see Rogers here in Canada, you know, taking the step. It's encouraging to see the One API trial that the GSMA just conducted. Supposedly there's going to be one for RCS as well. Those are quote unquote some you know, Canadian success stories that we could say yes, you know, we're in there. But you know, I would like to see a little bit more of that. It's going to take a while though, but I still think the verticalization aspect is going to be a way where you're going to be able to hopefully find some value.
Jeff, can I make an observation? I kind of think the telcos are in a funny position, right? Because if you think about the world today, I think we're all a little bit reluctant, and we're more concerned about security. So we're reluctant in, you know, giving away our credit card information or buying something electronically from an unknown source, right? So you have your kind of preferred suppliers like Amazon, you know, the telco. Maybe you have a store that you've dealt with and you trust them. But not everyone's crazy about buying something from some unknown supplier where you can't even tell where they're based, right? So the telco has this privileged position that you may not always appreciate the quality of the service or the bill, but you know who Rogers or Bell is, and you trust them with your payments. And so you know, click here to add this to your phone bill is a very attractive proposition in terms of trust and security and reliability. The challenge I see is, jeepers, how many app stores are there going to be, right? Like, you know, I have an iPhone, I used to have a BlackBerry, and okay, I'd basically think about one store, like, and it's from the hardware maker. And I think, you know, with respect to Vodafone and other carriers, everyone's, and Verizon, they all see an opportunity to sell apps, but apart from the, you know, if they only focused on trust and billing, I think they would do well. But the concept that, no, I'm Vodafone and everybody in Europe is going to buy their apps through me because I'm the great Vodafone, I don't think that washes, right? I'm even less convinced of the Canadian carrier's ability to pull that off. I mean, it's possible, but it's funny because they have this pole position in terms of trust and payments, where if they do it right, people would agree to pay things that way.
Before we move on to Ron's presentation, which is going to be more around 4G, and I want to kind of come back and perhaps go off script here a little bit. You got telco app stores, and here in Canada, you're going to, how many carriers do you have? Five? And you got all these over-the-top app stores. You got Amazon and eBay, who effectively have stores. And now you've got, how many devices in the market today in Canada? Dozens? Yeah. So in terms of consumer fatigue and how consumers are actually making decisions today, and I'm looking at Krista a little bit because you're studying the devices, what are you seeing in terms of, at the end of the day, once consumers do their analysis and get past the paralysis, what's really driving the purchase decision? Because they got lots of places they can go. What sort of early trends and behaviors are you guys seeing?
Well, I can tell you what's not, what's causing customers to refrain from buying the devices, which actually I think is pretty telling of your question. So we asked Canadians the #1 reason why they're not purchasing a media tablet today. I focus on media tablets, that's what I was looking at. And the #1 response was among businesses that they didn't think they had a use for the device. And I think that speaks more to the lack of education that we still have here in Canada around these devices. Because I would argue that most people probably do have a use for the device, they just don't know what it is. And so one of the things that isn't driving more of these sales is this lack of education. And the second most common response was they didn't think there was an ROI on the device. And again, I would argue from a business point of view, there probably is an ROI on the device. It's just that it isn't really obvious, blatantly obvious at this point. And price was actually down on the list a little bit. So I think as we have better education around what it is that users can do with these devices, that will answer your question, that will propel the additional adoption of them.
Well, yeah, I think that's definitely one point. I'm surprised how did the pricing of the wireless service itself ranked as an issue. Maybe not so much for businesses, but for the consumers, because still I think, and this is not so much a criticism of the more or less quasi oligopolistic market conditions that were commonplace until the last AWS Spectrum auction that happened, but also a testimony of the really superb way that the incumbents managed to keep pricing discipline, which is unlike other regions, and which makes great for analysts like yourself or on the basis side to cover these telecom companies that are doing so well. But I think to a certain degree the pricing of the service to a certain level I think must also weigh in, at least on the consumer side, and maybe we're slowly gonna see that become a little bit less of an issue, but still we never had the quote unquote all you can eat plan for the iPhone here. It's true that AT&T had it in the beginning when they ran into backhaul issues. They finally decided to start capping consumption, and Verizon supposedly now, even though the initial issue of iPhone they're not going to have any limits. Eventually, there's already talk that they will start in fact introducing those. But we never had those in Canada, so in a way, in a sense, like we never, the end users here might have not been able to sample as much, quote unquote. But in a way, that's also good because it makes them be pickier about how am I going to spend my time, how am I going to consume whatever allocation I have, and so they're going to be more selective.
Well, let's move on to your, I'm sorry, real quick, because we are running a little bit behind.
Sure, quick question on tablets. I was wondering if the panel had any data or information on what type of ARPU carriers are seeing around the world on tablets, because I do think this is a really interesting question given the nature of 3G versus Wi-Fi, and the fact that it does appear, at least anecdotally, that a lot of people that are jumping into tablets aren't necessarily people that are jumping on a 3G and using a data plan for an extended period of time like we've seen on smartphones. And I'm just wondering, I guess aloud, how interested telcos will really be in this segment if in fact the revenue stream coming behind it is somewhat undefined. And we've seen, if we look at the US market, it looks as though we don't know whether this is a subsidized model or unsubsidized model. They seem to go back and forth depending on device and depending on the carrier. I'm just wondering if you have any data on if there's money in this for telcos.
I think the potential for them to make money in the long term is pretty good, especially when you consider how the devices are so well suited to things like multimedia, like video and that type of thing. To start though, we saw more Wi-Fi devices shipped in Canada than 3G based devices, and we saw the #1 use of the devices, at least by the end of last year, on a media tablet simply being email. That was the #1 use of the devices. #2, from a business point of view, is using it for giving presentations. So again, things like video was actually way down on the list, and it was actually a fairly low usage. So again, I think it comes down to the education, users learning more about what they can do on these devices, becoming more comfortable with some of the more digital media aspects that it can offer. But it's similar to smartphones in that respect. Things like text messaging, like voice, like email are still some of the more primary uses of those devices versus some of the other more digital media type friendly things that you can do with it.
I think and again, it's a great segue to when Canada will get 4G. And I think one thing is for certain is that, and this does tie everything together, whether it be apps or tablet use, is that the more bandwidth people have, the more they're going to consume. And the experience that will be enjoyed on a broadband connection. I mean, how many folks, it's funny, my kids will never see a dial-up connection. 10 years ago, you were dealing with dial-up, and here we are with mobile devices on video, and the experience that you have on the tablet is completely different. So I think that's a great question that we'll probably come back and revisit a number of different times. But let's move to the 4G and the road to 4G, and when Canada will see real 4G here for users.
Thank you, Jeff, and it's a privilege for me to be back here, and I have to apologize for coughing in the middle of your explanation there, but as I said, my voice is kind of so-so today. I'm also, doing this, it's first of all, it's an honor and a privilege, and I'm kind of doing it also on adrenaline, because last night I had another, as you recall again from last year, I was going through the Baby 2.0 experience. Well, now Baby 2.0 is a year older, and he was keeping me up at night. So
I thought you were going to tell us you had another baby.
No, unfortunately, Baby Factory is closed now. But after two boys, we closed it. But anyway, I think I'm going to try. I have a lot of points here. What I'm going to try to do is I'll go through the main ones, and I know the slides will be available later on for download, and maybe, I want this to also be a resource for you, so I won't be able to necessarily cover every single point, but I'll sort of transition into 4G, but first I'll talk about the three major problems that are facing operators today. Now you see the graph there, this laser thing works. Oops, no, that's the back. No, there's no laser. Okay, but the top graph there shows the Cisco Systems VNI, the Visual Networking Index, which is an annual survey that Cisco does. And in fact, those numbers are actually pretty close to what they were last year, except kind of shifted for 2015. But let me explain that for a bit. So you got pretty robust, almost three-digit compound annual growth rate, CAGR, for growth in this is mobile traffic, and you see that video is going to make up 2/3 almost of the traffic by 2015. So that was the figure that was similar to last year's numbers, because they had like 2014, 66.7%, something like this. But so that's going to continue. And the culprits we already know. We see the smartphones. Of course, they consume a lot more data than the feature phones. There's a usage of mobile broadband via USB modems, via tablets, etc. There's still I know. Jim was mentioning Redmi, and there's probably some OSS, BSS vendors in here in the audience, but unmetered mobile data plans still happen in some regions in the world, believe it or not, and it's not just a matter of a business model choice. Is that some of these OSS, BSS systems have not been put in place yet. So especially LATAM, they're finally catching up, but there's still opportunity there. And finally, the advent of video as well. So that's one area. I think the second area, the network congestion, again, still it's a pretty big concern. I think if you look at those three areas, you have the RAN, the backhaul, and the core signaling. Everybody usually talks about the backhaul being the critical one, and absolutely it is, because if you think about the old modus operandi when you used to use T1, E1 lines, those old circuit lines are being replaced by IP. That's not so new, but what's new is you're also seeing more infrastructure type developments. So we talk about anything from microwave, wireless to fiber. Unfortunately, not everybody did what the Chinese did, which was to future-proof their network with fiber. So here, our carriers in North America, so we look at AT&T, where, iPhone became so successful, they almost became a victim of their own success, because, the cost structure also was not very good, because, you had a linear cost, and revenues were kind of growing more like, asymptotically or logarithmically. So that's depicted in the picture there below. We see that, the traffic is growing exponentially, and the revenues are not really growing so fast. So But also, the RAN, the radio access network, I'll say, currently that's okay. It's not quite critical, but there's been a lot of capacity additions that have happened in areas of dense subscriber counts, and I remember seeing Ibrahim Gideon's presentation at MWC about a couple of years ago, where he was really showing that this was only really happening, so like the downtown core in Toronto, like areas like that where you have really quite a lot of power users and also data consumption, and this is happening in the United States as well, these urban environments, New York, San Francisco. But there's also the core signaling that's not often mentioned, but that's people are still trying to figure that one out. So SS7 signaling is slowly giving way to SIP. SIP is a lot chattier protocol. There's also more session attempts, so I put a figure there, 10 times increase in session attempts per device for a smartphone, and so really this is also an area that's going to play itself out. We're going to see more attention being paid to that, and witness for instance Cisco making an acquisition of a core network play like Stern Networks. And the third point is that the data growth is happening much higher than the data revenue growth. So the traffic growth is exponential. The revenue is logarithmic. So again, not all mobile data is profitable. 75 to 90% of the traffic generates about 10% of service revenues. This is actually from one of our studies that was focused on, I would say it was a pre-global distribution, but it was a little bit more centric towards Europe. So, I would have to go back and check that. But this is mostly, it's got some more weight from Europe, but it also had some North American operators in there. And again, there's also unintended consequences. Mobile data growth rates also could lead sometimes to lower mobile termination rates. So I'm giving Sweden as an example. But what can the operators do to actually solve this? And this is where we're going to start seeing a lot more of that. Believe it or not, this is a much bigger issue on the and it's not doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure that one out. But it's a much bigger issue for mobile networks than it is for fixed networks. But we all saw on a fixed side with usage-based billing, issue that became sort of a hot one last couple of weeks. But on the mobile side as well, despite some of these caps that were put on way back, we still see the need of carriers to adopt some network management policies, and they could be manifold. I mean, I put an example here. I think this is a great picture from NSN, so I just took it from one of their presentations. But let's say a heavy consumer reaches a certain volume limit. He has a 4 gig cap. So let's say what you can do once he hits that, you could throttle the access speed, so he'll be able to only access the network at a lower bit rate. Or alternatively, he could give him an option to say, hey, you want to purchase more capacity? And and I think operators like Telia Sonera and Tele2 in Sweden, they've been very successful with that upsell. So being able to sell more, to trigger that additional charge, and they're being able to increase their ARPU quite nicely that way. And I guess the third way is the lower priority. So what that means is you say, well, I'm going to look at my network as in a true utility fashion. So let's say I get to a certain point where you maxed out your 4 gig limit, but let's say you want to use the network off peak. So it's still a resource, and I want you to still be my customer. So maybe when you're accessing during peak busy hour, I'll throttle you down to 64 kilobits per second. But off peak, I may be able to give you, whatever the network could offer you, which is that third scenario. There's a whole bunch of other things they could do. They could buy additional spectrum. So, we have that upcoming 700 megahertz spectrum auction in Canada. And a lot of things that get talked about more and more is the macro network offload. So being able to use femtocells and Wi-Fi. We have stats that we keep, and basically about 60% of mobile data traffic is generally generated indoors. So there's great potential for you to offload some of that traffic onto a femtocell, or if you're talking on consumer side, Wi-Fi. So we're going to see more and more of that. And finally, site network sharing. So again, Tele2, Tele in Sweden, Bell Telus HSPA overlay. We have another example from the UK where Tree and T-Mobile have teamed up. Again, by the way, the savings are based on a whole bunch of different assumptions, but somewhere between 4 to 11%, could be even higher, again, depending the assumptions you use, but it's definitely there, and this is really the one thing that I think is a little bit surprising to me, that none of the new entrants really in Canada, so we talking public mobile, Mobilicity, Wind, in Quebec, Videotron, or perhaps Shaw out west, but well, they're a little bit slower, but still, not, at least here in Toronto, we haven't seen, let's say, any network sharing. So I could go downtown and I count, sorry, I count the number of towers, and I'm basically seeing, there's like not towers, but the antennas, like south side, right? There's like why is there 5 of them? It's too much duplication. The only thing I could think of is perhaps they want to be more flexible when they want to, sell that asset to someone else, and if they have already some sort of sharing agreement, makes it a little bit more difficult to break that up. But still, it's beyond me. I would have tried to do that if I were in their shoes. But regardless, and the 5th point is the technology evolution to get the extra efficiency. So I think when we talk about LTE. And again, going back to last year's presentation, I think I had a graph that I also took from Ibrahim Gideon's presentation. We're pretty close to that fundamental limit in wireless communication, the Shannon limit. So, but there's still some level of optimization that we could achieve. We could put more use this multiple input, multiple output technique. We could put more carriers. We could add the bandwidth. There's still some improvements, but ultimately we're getting closer and closer to that. But still there's improvements to be made in terms of lower latency and increased throughputs that will more or less match what we see in DSL, and greater spectral efficiency. So I have a graph in there that basically shows that. Now, the key question is, will pricing pressures help the adoption of 4G LTE? In essence, it's always good when pricing erosion happens, technology gets adopted more and more and becomes more of a mainstream. But I think, some operators like, and I'm picking one example here, Vodafone, they kind of learn, their lesson from the past, that they were saying, well, if we go out and we launch, we're going to be paying top dollar initially for one of the early adopters, because it's going to cost more for us to buy that network infrastructure. And I think that they're trying to optimize more and more some of them are even outsourcing, like Mobilicity is outsourcing the network management to Ericsson. We saw similar deals in the States with Sprint. We're seeing more and more utilization-driven models, and also here I have a chart that basically shows, this is the Vodafone 3G experience, and it's taken from one of their presentations. But what they're basically saying here is the no-B price reduction over time, and you see it's that pretty steep curve. So what does this mean for LTE? Because I think in terms of Canada, we're kind of known, and this is a segue to my next slide, we're kind of more known for being a little bit more like smart followers than early adopters. And in some ways, maybe from this perspective, this is okay, because it shows that the operators will not necessarily pay top dollar for the equipment. But if you also look at the fact that LTE may not be as pricey as the previous upgrade from 2G to 3G, because if you keep up with the development, and if you have HSPA Plus and you want to upgrade to LTE, it's less hardware intensive, less civil engineering intensive, and it's more of doing an upgrade in terms of software, and is not so capex intensive. So I have a couple of price points here. Orange estimates 50 to 100 million euro to upgrade two large French cities from well, we call it 3.7 5G, which is that HSPA Plus, to 4G. Telenor LTE overlay tender was worth about $200 million over 6 years. So that's a couple of data points for you. But bottom line is, it's going to be a little bit of a mix, because in a way it's going to help, but it's also going to delay, because some people are going to say, some of the operators are going to say, okay, let's wait a little bit more. Now, what does it mean to Canada? Again, the observation of us being smart followers, but I think we have some trialing activity going on, and I certainly talked to some of you in the audience, some network equipment vendors and some operators. There's appetite for more trials, but the one that's public out there is the Rogers LTE trial in the Ottawa area. So initially they're using the AWS spectrum band, but then they're also looking at doing one at the 700 megahertz spectrum band, and they will probably need government authorization to do that. Now, that's going to be crucial. That's a key milestone for 4G in Canada, because we haven't had that auction yet. That's a so-called digital dividend spectrum, which is basically the spectrum that's going to be vacated when TV stations move from analog to digital. In fact, it's kind of funny anecdotal story, but Verizon in Detroit, that was one of their 4G cities, they were having some issues because there's a Windsor TV station that's still using some of that spectrum that they have, and it's causing them a little bit of issues there. And so they probably, that station may need to do it before, but the TV stations in Canada have until end of August of this year to do that. Now, that beachfront property quote, that's not mine, that came from the FCC, because this is very, very valuable spectrum. And why is it valuable? Because it basically requires less capex, fewer cell sites, and the propagation characteristics are better. You could also go through the buildings better. And so this spectrum is really going to be, think of it as, in terms of real estate, this is going to be like, I wouldn't say even like Baby Point. This is more like bridle path of spectrum, for Toronto. It's going to be the real premium, and so we're talking about 70 to 90 megahertz in that 698 to 806 megahertz band, and I think again, depends how much they decide to allocate. The CRTC decides to allocate for public safety. But nevertheless, we're estimating that this probably won't happen until second half of 2012, even though publicly I could tell you that especially the incumbents, they wanted this auction to have happened yesterday. In fact, I was invited to Scotia Capital event last November, and Nadir Mohammed was saying, well, the spectrum is there, we're ready, we want it. Obviously, that's their intention, but I think obviously it's in the government's interest and the CRTC's interest to actually hold off a little bit because you want to maximize your revenues with that sale, and this cannot really happen until you decide on the Wind Mobile issue, which I know we're going to talk about, so I won't talk too much, but there's that ruling that came out on Friday from the federal court, and so the question is, will the government finally choose to enact its stated policy of increasing competition? And that's where it gets tricky, because you start getting into the political issues and whether or not this is going to be an election year, and whether or not the conservatives want to maybe perhaps trigger an election based on this issue. I don't know. I think honestly, with what happened with the UBB, this area could be one area where we could maybe find perhaps some more consensus between the parties. So it may not be as hot potato politically as it was in the past. Not only that, Wind Mobile today has 250,000 subscribers. And still, it makes us look pretty bad if they bid on spectrum after getting the okay from Industry Canada, only to have the CRTC reject that, then have the government say, okay, no, they meet the specs, and then have the courts say, no, guess what, technically, that double negation is not quite, what you interpreted it should be. So I'm hoping that finally, the good sense prevails and that we do open things up a little bit. Nevertheless, that's not going to be addressed until later this year, and what's key about the auction and about how 4G will unfold in Canada is who's gonna win, and which of the new entrants will stay and which ones will sell out. And I present to you, this is my my guess estimate, but I would say that if you're one of the new entrants and you don't get any of this premium spectrum, you're going to be in a pretty difficult spot, and chances are you'll probably be looking for someone to buy you out, or making some sort of an arrangement or some sort of a deal. And again, it depends who you sell it to, because if you sell it to one of the incumbents, 2013 is the closing. CRTC will have a pretty tough job, and I know many people in the public like to criticize Conrad von Finkelstein, and I think he's got a very difficult job, because he's going to be able to figure out what is he going to do, how is he going to maximize the effectiveness of this. Is he going to do some set-asides where he maybe set aside some of that new spectrum for new entrant, like maybe he'll split it up in two. It's very difficult because the spectrum is much smaller. It's not as much spectrum out there as it was for the AWS. So that, in my view, it's not, but who knows? Maybe he would decide to just go with two, and then maybe reserve one chunk for the new entrants and one chunk in which the incumbents could also bid. Of course, the incumbents will like to bid on everything, but the other issue is resale, whether or not they will create some new exit barriers, just like they did for the AWS, to make sure that the quote-unquote the new entrants have quote-unquote staying power, or they are forced to kind of stay in the market, right? Or whether or not they'll impose spectrum caps. I mean, just to give you an example, and Rogers has about 40% of the spectrum. So not that I mean to pick on them. It could be the incumbents all have pretty decent spectrum holdings. So maybe is that something that the CRTC would like to do? It's very, very tricky, very, very dicey, and that could also be met with some challenges which will further delay this. So that's a little bit of a wild card. Nevertheless, based on what we know today, and based on the consultation process, which will involve two stages, I think that the auction will probably happen late 2012, and so that means that probably until 2013 thereabouts at the earliest, before we start seeing some LTE services here, but we'll see. I mean, I think it's going to be a combination of things. It's going to be tablets, the USB sticks. Is going to be in the beginning. A lot of it is going to be just data-driven apps. So pretty much the Verizon model, in a way that the voice is still going to ride on the older network. In Verizon's case, it's CDMA, and the data is going to be on the new 4G network eventually. But I think here in Canada, by the end of 2012, some of these issues have been already solved with one voice, right? I mean, the consensus, more or less, for you to packetize the voice and put it on the same data network, that has been more or less reached, because before you had different competing alternatives like Voga or voice over LTE, and now there's finally some consensus building, so it may happen sooner.
Thank you, Ron. This question is for Michael and Krista. Why should consumers in Canada care about 4G? What's the big deal?
I can answer that very briefly. I don't think they do care. I don't think they should care, and I don't think they do care. Because it was alluded to with the Wi-Fi offload. I think consumers by and large, don't buy an engineering proposition, they buy a total product. And what they care about is, can I stream my movies? Can I do my enterprise CRM thing? Can I phone home, and can I do my SMS, etc.? And there's a variety of ways to address that frankly don't have to raise what's my spectrum, right? I mean, yeah, we're all bandwidth hogs at the end of the day, and so improved throughput from a new technology is helpful, but I just don't think these things are as important as maybe we thought they were when we moved to 3G.
Yeah, we haven't seen congestion in Toronto like they have in New York and San Fran. So for the average user, 3.5 is fine, and they probably don't even know it's 3.5 because they just get to do what they want to do, and at the end of the day, that's what matters to the end consumer.
As an outsider looking in, the theme I continue to hear in the last couple of years I've been coming to Toronto and participating in these programs is that the competition and pricing of the service is the overriding issue. And I don't see anything we've talked about today that's really going to have an impact on that, except for the ability for investment to flow in and competition to flow in. What are your thoughts overall about, is that the real issue in Canada? And then what's it going to take to break through to lower pricing plans for Canadians?
I mean, maybe I'll take a crack at that one. I think it's maybe a combination of things. I mean, I talked about competition, and I think having a good competitive environment, I think it's fundamental. And we've seen this, with the new entrants. Rogers, launched Chatter. Would they have launched Chatter had there not been a Mobilicity or Public Mobile or Wind? I think it's difficult to say, but I think also I was hoping for that competition we need staying power, and I was saying initially that from all the new entrants, the ones that looked to have the longest staying power looked like it was, and it still probably is, to a certain degree, Wind Mobile, just because of the backers who are behind that. And not only that, there's also the thought of, okay, if you are part of a bigger conglomerate, of a Rascom, like you have, pardon me, let me rephrase that, some investment that has come in from that, you are able to then command a better discount, like a group volume discount, which none of the Canadian operators could really match, because we're talking about 100 million plus subs. If you look at all the weather investments, holdings, and so I think in order for us to get that competition, in my view, you need the new entrants, but you need them to also stay, and you also need a relaxation of foreign ownership rules. I think, in my view, that's the best thing that could possibly happen in Canada. Maybe I say this, I'm a Canadian, but I was originally born in Brazil, and I could say that everywhere I look in the world and I see wherever competition has been active, and Brazil is an example, but if I'm looking at Canada, I look at counterparts, like I look at the UK, or I look at even a country like Sweden, like there has been a lot of foreign investment that has come out from other telcos that are global players. Like, look at the UK, they have Vodafone, which is the only true British player, but they have Tree, which is Asian interests. They have T-Mobile, which is German, which is now teaming up with Orange, and O2, which is now Telefonica. So only really one true British player. But I would argue with you that Vodafone is so strong internationally because of that very intense competition that has existed in the UK for so many years, that forced them to go and look elsewhere for some business. Unfortunately, in Canada, this didn't happen in the past. I know our Canadian operators have dabbled a little bit internationally, and it's not only the issue of why won't Mexicans buy Mosen? I mean, I read the book, but it's also the issue of many times when you're treading along that line, and you have good pricing discipline, but also not very high penetration, still kind of getting through that. We just got past the 70% mark, and our market is not saturated yet as other parts of the world. And so some of them had to focus more on our stuff here. Maybe I don't want to say that's the root cause for some of those other failures like BC, Bell Canada International, etc. But that was a contributing factor.
Let's, the bar is going to be open in about 7 minutes, so we've got some more networking outside. So I'd like to maybe switch to the audience. Let's spend 5 to 7 minutes taking questions from the audience on any topic.
Hi, it's Jerry. Just a question for Ron. Maybe you can comment on the public safety issue in the 700 spectrum. In the U.S., it's caused a lot of controversy, the C block, and in terms of first responders looking at getting a cohesive spectrum that's all across the U.S. Is that an issue in Canada, and do you see that becoming an issue?
Yeah, no, it's an interesting question. I think the key is it's not even certain what's going to happen in the U.S. because now with the change in Congress that they had, who knows? There's even some speculation, and I've certainly seen some reports out there that may suggest that they may decide to auction that off too, and sort of rethink their public safety strategy altogether. It's tricky. I don't really have an answer other than you have to somehow reconcile the need for certain public safety versus the need for operators to offer some service, and for you to be able to sell that spectrum as a regulatory body like the CRTC. It will be interesting to see what they're going to follow, if they're going to take the lead from the U.S. or I think they may decide to be more independent on this one. But that's just a guess. I think they're going to certainly be watching what's going to transpire in the U.S. because it's not exactly sure. Even though that was earmarked for public safety, it's not necessarily a foregone conclusion that that's in fact what's going to happen. But perhaps Jeff and Mike may have some stuff to add about that.
I mean, just a couple quick comments on, at least in the American market, you've got, on the one hand, you've got fire and safety regulators that are putting mandates on building owners to have ubiquitous coverage for first responders, which is going to drive building owners to have to, literally, to get building permits, have to provide coverage in the stairwells and elevators, et cetera, which puts more pressure on the carriers to provide good service. So I think that's going to play itself out, but it ends up, the burden falls on the carriers to invest more money when they're declining revenues, so they're under more pressure. The other scenario you're seeing is utility companies, whether it be the local energy company, they're wanting their own spectrum to be able to run their own field force management and meter reading, et cetera. So they're battling for their own slice of spectrum. And I'll give you an example. In New York City, the city of New York used to have their policemen, firemen, ambulance paying Verizon $80 a month for data card type service. Well, they looked at the numbers and they ended up, basically they had their own spectrum, they bought IP wireless equipment, and they put in 400 towers and basically cut themselves off from Verizon completely. So they own their own private network now for video surveillance, first responders, and they've got their own data cards. And so I think one of the other dynamics here, if the carriers don't innovate and if they don't adapt, their business is just going to disappear gradually. And I applaud, I think Vodafone's a real interesting example. Because of the fierce competition, they found ways to deliver value for shareholders, but it took looking at the business a different way. When you look at the U.S. market, AT&T is one company. Verizon is half owned by Vodafone, right? Mm-hmm. So, and then the next player down, T-Mobile, is half owned by Deutsche Telekom. So even in the American market, you've got, I think it's going to be interesting how things play out. And one more point that I think is really interesting, if you look over the past decade, the mobile technology companies, the Googles, the Apples, the Microsoft, their market caps have gone up $250 billion, whereas the carrier market caps have gone down $150 billion. And another interesting stat is you've got the balance sheets. If you look at the balance sheets of the two carriers, they've now got 50 to 60, 70 billion dollars of debt on their books, while Google and Apple have 50 to 70 billion dollars of cash. So if the carriers don't figure out a different game plan, instead of getting chipped away by, again, public safety, if all the utilities just went away from the carriers, that's a large enterprise customer, it just disappears. You know, what's the future hold without some innovation? So 2 data points, at least in the American market, about utilities, but please go ahead.
Gord Austin. On what I heard on your presentation on 4G was you were expecting that the Canadian government would wait for 700 megahertz and wait for foreign ownership, and it all seemed to be gated. But there's a fair degree of AWS spectrum sitting today that's not being used. And if I listen to Verizon and some of their comments about LTE, they're expecting a fairly substantial lowering in their cost per bit with their LTE network. So why would we be waiting, or are we really just positioning and posturing for spectrum?
No, it's an excellent question, and certainly LTE could be deployed in AWS spectrum, could be deployed, 2.5 gigahertz, and it's going to be many different bands. But again, it goes back to that beachfront property. That 700 megahertz one is going to be key because lower deployment costs, better propagation characteristics. You will go through buildings a lot, and now to go up from 700 to the the AWS is not. It's still pretty significant. It's a pretty decent deal, but when you're talking about going up to 2.5 gigahertz, then that's even less optimal, and you require more capex dollars and more sectorization, etc. And and I think that's the issue. To Jeff's point, I mean, carriers are trying to optimize everything, and what better way to optimize? And so that's why I think this 700 megahertz spectrum is going to be so key. And but it could very well be that perhaps just like Rogers is trialing LTE in some of that AWS spectrum, maybe we will see something before. But at the same time, I think what I was trying to say is also let's start looking at handsets. Not out there yet, so it's all data. I think for now we're not going to be. It's a little bit of a stretch to assume that we're going to be out there just to say, hey, we have LTE, but it's AWS. But I think they're going to wait a little bit more. But anything is possible, of course.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a little announcement about something that might be of interest to people in the software community, especially if you're interested in apps. So there's a thing coming up in the next couple of weeks. It's called the Great Canadian Appathon. And it's being sponsored by a software company here called XMG, as well as TELUS, the National Post, and KPMG. And basically, it's what they call a hackathon. So the weekend of March 11th to 13th, if you're of the right age and temperament and you want to code all weekend, there's this hackathon to create games or apps. And I think the top prize is $25,000. Second prize is $10,000. And then there's some other prizes. I think it's primarily designed to stimulate innovation and to motivate students. So it's called the Great Canadian Appathon. There is a website, www.greatcanadianappathon.ca. And if you want to pull a couple of all-nighters, there you go.
Is that for which platform? Any
I'm not. I think they hadn't concluded whether it was going to have a platform-specific situation or if it was going to be open. If it's open, it would be clearly Android and iOS, and if it's sponsored by an OS, that might steer them. So I think it's still to be determined, but you'll see announcements on that in the next couple of weeks.
Okay. Well, it's 8:30. I do. Any other questions from the audience before we break? Turn the mic back over to Jim. Please.
This one's more of a marketing question. Hello? Hi. Just want to know what kind of data you have in terms of video for commercial purposes. I know that video is on the rise, but more for entertainment for like video or YouTube. But what about video for commercial purposes, either B2B or B2C, promoting products? Thank you.
I mean, I'll just make a comment.
What data you got for that?
Go ahead, please.
Oh yeah, I know we have some data around that, but I don't have it at my fingertips, so you have to come up to me afterwards.
I think on the content side, one thing we didn't talk about, we talked about Google and Apple and their role in disrupting the marketplace, but we really haven't yet talked about the content. And I had the good fortune of being at the Weather Channel office in Atlanta last week and at the NBA as part of Turner Broadcast has a partnership with the NBA. And when you look at where they're generating advertising revenue that incorporates video and on mobile devices, is their whole business plans are now being predicated on these new emerging devices, tablets and smartphones, and you're seeing real money being spent on advertising and people paying for video content. And so these are brand new business plans that have been created, but the Weather Channel probably touches more people every day in terms of content than any other content provider in the US, and people just don't think about it. But they're starting to monetize that through advertising. NBA, on the other hand, touches a lot of sports fans, but they're monetizing it by way of subscription. And I don't know if you guys have any closing comments on, is content really king?
I know in speaking with Score Mobile and some other content owners, they're able to charge more for advertising, and they've seen a lot more success in terms of money they're making off a media tablet versus the same type of video on a smartphone. Because it's more engaging, the advertisers are willing to pay more for it, so we do see that moving forward as being pretty lucrative.
I will make a couple of observations. I think one is centered around the end user experience and the codecs. Google, since we're talking about them, they bought a Swedish company called Global IP Sound, GIPS, or I think their last name was Global IP Solutions, and they do great codecs not only for audio but also video. And I think that's indicative that they're trying to be very active on that space. And I think they have an opportunity to layer into their Maps apps, that are freely available on mobiles, etc. They could layer, let's say, something that will have advertising and perhaps even video, but let's say an augmented reality application where, let's say Jeff comes here and he says, okay, point me to a restaurant or something, and and you could say, okay, there's a Chinese restaurant a couple of blocks that way, and you say, oh, interesting, let's see, and you push and you see the video. I think that has the potential of being interesting, because the customer has already got that initial engagement that it's going to be it's going to be demand driven, not something that's going to be kind of pushed out to people where they don't want to see, that mini TV like commercial that's being sent to them without them wanting to see that.
Fair enough. So I don't want to get between you and a drink, but if you think about kind of a multi-content or multi-platform, converged, multimedia, blah, 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 it's a little bit meaningless, right? But if you think about Netflix, right? So you go to Netflix, the ads are all over the web in Canada now. You can watch Faulty Towers on your PC, on your iPhone, on your TV through your game console, or a couple hundred other shows and movies for all of $8 a month. And I think that the user experience is a very good one, because you don't care what the device is, you don't care about the price because it's pretty modest, as long as there's good selection. They're not quite there yet. But it did strike me as a very convenient, converged service that's really well done. And that you sort of step back and say, do I care who my carrier is? Not really, right? I mean, what's the role of the carrier there? Pipe, right? There may be a role for the carrier to ensure that I get a more reliable stream, right? And so maybe you can set up a requirement for payments between the carrier and Netflix. But that's a really compelling service.
Jim, I think we'll wrap up and just want to say thanks. We could go on for another hour on content, but these guys are going to be around afterward to answer questions, and let's give them a round of applause. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So thanks everyone to the panel. Thank you, Krista and Ronnie and Michael, and of course Jeff. Thanks for coming up from Texas to join us. So. If you want to learn more about RCR Wireless, just go to rcrwireless.com and subscribe. They've got a great daily email that you can get all the latest and greatest news from. I'm not sure whether our friends from Rogers are still here. They were taking business cards for a draw, so is Nicole or Will still here? Okay, well they'll probably be doing the draw and emailing the winner of the prize. Just a little heads up for March's event. So March will be our VC panel pitch program. So for the last 4 years, this will be year 5, we've done a Dragon's Den style event where we get local VCs and people from the mobile community, be it startups or, as Jeff said, in the basement or whatnot, people that have ideas, concepts, application businesses that need funding or they want to get feedback from VCs. They submit a one-pager to us and they have the opportunity to meet with VCs and pitch in front of the Mobile Monday community. So over the last 5 years, we've had participation from BCE Capital, Ventures West, JL Albright, RBC, Edgestone Capital Partners, Bellwether Capital. So a really good range of VCs usually are in attendance. So probably have some of those guys back, and we'll be putting a posting online in the next, I'd say, week or so, asking for those one-page submissions to pitch the dragon, so to speak. So anyways, once again, thanks again for the help today. Great insights and feedback. So I guess we can continue the networking on right now. So thank you.